Jeremy, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Well, before we get to 559 fights 100, take me back to Tachi Val's days.
Okay.
What's the fantastic story from that you got, man?
Oh man, there's so many crazy stories at Tachi. I think one of the things that I love about Tachi was when Christian Printup was there and I first got there, and we were creating Palace Fighting Championships together, and it was kind of my very infancy into the sport, and really being able to travel. We traveled across the country, kind of trying to open up the 125 division before it was really mainstream or anywhere else. So coming to Vegas and talking to Ulysses Gomez and traveling all over and finding the Rambasam that's in Thailand, and just really touching that weight class and trying to build that weight class, I think was kind of like an unforgettable experience for me, because it was guys that were competing at a super high level in the sport but weren't getting the exposure that they deserve, and being able to put them on a platform like Tachi, I think really helped set off that division that was really primarily only being fought in Japan at the time.
How important do you think Tachi Palace fights, like how big of an impact do you think that it really was?
So all the way back into WEC and then Palace Fighting Championships and Tachi Palace fights, I mean, in that era of time, that was the only feeder to the UFC, right? So now you see a lot of shows on Fight Pass, the LFAs, the Furies, the Cage Warriors, the CFFCs. Those guys are all feeding into a Contender Series, which now goes on and really gets at the next level. But at that time frame, early on, it was like the very start of the wheel, right? It was the very start of, hey, these are the guys that are going to be feeding into the UFC and getting guys the fights that they need to get to the next level, because nowhere else was fights really going on at a consistent high level as they were when the WEC Palace Fighting Championships and then Tachi Palace fights came aboard.
Who do you think the best fighter to come out of Tachi Palace is?
We had multiple guys fight for world titles. You had Joe Soto, you had Chad Mendes, you had Alex Perez, Mikey McDonald was another big one. So you've had a lot of guys, and I know I'm missing some that fought at a super high level, and so to say who was the best out of that group is going to be tough. They were all different weight classes, you know what I mean? You had Alex at 25s, Soto at 35s, you had Chad at 45s. So I don't know, but those guys, man, they were something special, you know what I mean? And to watch Chad Mendes fight his very first fight, and watch Joe Soto fight his very first fight, I watched Alex Perez fight his very first fight. All those guys come from the Valley, Porterville, Hanford, Lemoore, and then go on and fight at the elite level of the UFC was something super special for me.
How special is it to watch somebody, like you said, Chad Mendes fight his first fight, crawl his way to the UFC, fight for that title. Alex Perez, same way. Like, how special is it?
Me and Alex have a super special bond, you know what I mean? He was a Lemoore High wrestler when I first got my son into wrestling, and Alex was his coach. So that's how Alex and I kind of developed a relationship. So, like, pulling on the heartstrings a little bit, Alex is always that guy that I look back and I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, like, I watched this kid come from zero, you know what I mean, all the way to be able to fight for a world title, you know what I mean? And he's a guy who slept on people's couches, slept on floors, slept at the gym, did everything in his power to try to make it to the next level, and now, is a business owner, you know what I mean, and a father, you know what I mean? So I get to see not only his progression into fighting at the next level and fighting for world titles, but seeing his progression as a man, you know what I mean, was something super awesome,
We'll get to 559, but like, tell me, like, I feel like a lot of people think putting on fights isn't as hard as it seems. but you've put on successful promotions, and you have the premier amateur spot. But how hard is it? How hard is it putting on?
So, putting on events can be super difficult in a sense that I think a lot of people don't know what they're getting into when they first start. They look at fights and they think, oh man, anyone could do this, you know what I mean? really what you have to understand when you're in MMA, this is the relationship business, right? You're gonna have to deal with all sorts of characters, from the fighters to the coaches to the managers to the lighting company to the DJ to fans, and just being a person that can be tolerant and learn that you need to learn how to speak to people in all walks of life and be kind. And I wasn't the greatest at that early on, you know. I'm always been known for being an asshole, you know what I'm saying? And as something over time that I started to hate, that was the perception, but it was because I was strict, you know what I mean? And so learning that I needed to be more vocal and to get people to understand why I was strict on them and why I was hard on people so that they could make it to the next level, it really kind of changed things, you know what I mean? So I think the challenge really comes in working with several different people and understanding that, you know, Christian Prentice taught me the one thing that has always stuck with me, and I talk about it in almost every interview that I ever do, is that you learn what kind of promoter that you are during the events, because nothing is going to go right? Not everything is going to go right. So for the outside world to think that the show is going as planned, but behind the scenes there's all sorts of fires going on, and you're able to put those fires out and maintain a smile on your face and do all that and not let people know what's really going on behind the scenes, you know. So, and I've learned that every event I've ever had, nothing has gone perfect, right? I had to adapt, make changes. There was a show at 559 Fights where we were doing an outdoor event and it rained, and we were able to move the event to another city inside. We were able to get the liquor license and get all these things done in 12 hours, you know what I mean? So those are the types of things that you kind of learn along the way. Some people don't even know that, you know, you got to provide insurance or provide an ambulance, or, you know, what type of ambulance it needs to be. There's so many details, so many things that go on behind the scenes. People have no clue what it takes to put on a real event.
Obviously, and it's very fucking expensive to put on events.
Yeah.
A lot of promotions don't even make money at these events. So do you feel like that's one of the reasons why you see these promotions come and do one event, like they come and be like, all right, we're gonna take this over. They don't break even and they're out.
It's twofold, right? I think a lot of people get into wanting to promote events because they're fans, right? And they love the sport and they kind of want to give back to the sport. And what they see is the ugly side of MMA when they get involved. And I feel like a lot of times it's not so much the losing of money or the only breaking even. Sometimes I think a lot of people get involved and they're like, I just don't want to deal with this headache, man. You know, and I've seen a lot of great people get involved in our sport and then realize, you know, like whether it's from guys pulling out last minute or dealing with coaches that are just they're not great characters, you know what I mean, or dealing with a manager that's not really managing his athletes properly and doesn't understand that, you know, you have to be helpful to the promotions in some senses. You know, you deal with so much of that, and then it kind of puts a negative taste in people's mouth, and then when they start losing money, they're like, man, forget this, you know. And I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, this guy's loaded, he's gonna get into the sport, and I'm like, rich people are rich for a reason. You know what I mean? Because they don't deal with a lot of this bullshit, and they don't lose money. You know what I mean? And MMA is a very difficult thing to make money in, regardless what people think about it. You have to commit your life to MMA in several different aspects. A coach can't just be a coach, right? He's got to be a gym owner. He's got to teach privates. He's got to do all these other. Some coaches manage. They do all these different plethora of things within the sport in order to make a living. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what you see a lot of people do is they're not just touching the sport in one way. You know, they have a podcast. They're might book fighters here and there. You know what I mean? They matchmake. They do different things. So everyone's trying to dabble and do different things to make a living in a sport in which they love. And I think a lot of people get chased out of it by just the difficulty of the space per se.
How have you lasted so long?
I think that I've lasted so long because I've had a lot of great mentors in my life that have taught me different things. And then, you know, when Jason and I came together at Iridium, I wasn't the person that I thought like my way was always the right way. And Jason opened up my eyes to like reading books and seeing different avenues and different ways, and then growing our circle and talking to different people and really, opening my eyes to different things where hard lines that I drew in the sand 10 years ago are not those same hard lines that I draw in the sand today. I've learned that, like, hey, that's not so important. You know what I mean? And so just being able to adapt, and I think just my love for the sport overall. A lot of people ask me, like, why do you still do 559 fights? You're in Vegas now. You work with one of the best sports agencies in the country. You know what I mean? You got guys like Brandon, Alex, Cheeto. You know what I mean? All these big names. And I truly, truly do it because I love my people back in the Central Valley. And if I wasn't doing it, I don't know that anybody else would. So that's just an area that kind of goes dormant. And to me, it's like a historic area in MMA, and it needs to be continued to be massaged and grown and rebuilt, and a fire's going to come through and blaze it down again, and then we're going to have to regrow it, and it's just going to be keep being an evolution point for MMA in the history.
There have been a few amateur promotions, but I feel like 559 Fights is probably the premier amateur promotion. It's coming up on its 100th event. I guess first, before we talk about that, just how important is it to have amateur promotions?
So, if you talk to the old guard of MMA, right, they hate it. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're fighting, you should be getting paid. And I 100% agree. Like, fighting is a tough sport, and I do believe guys should be getting paid for putting their necks on the line. Where I kind of disagree in some aspects is what happens is in our sport, once you start fighting professionally, your record is everything. And so if you start not at the right time or too soon, or you don't have proper people in your life that are going to guide you, and your skills aren't where they need to be, you kind of get mowed over in this sport. And I've seen a lot of guys that have had like 8-8 records, and I'm like, that dude would literally beat the dog piss out of some people at the UFC level, but they will never get there now because early on in their career they were mismanaged, whether it was by a coach, by a manager, themselves, whoever the case may be. So I think having a short amateur career where we're able to get in and experience some things that have to do with MMA is good. Right, because I believe experience outweighs the cost of money and the value of money to an athlete. So being able to get in there, get some experience taken care of, learn things like signing a contract, doing your medicals, competing when you're sick. You know what I mean? I tell guys all the time, they'll call me and they'll say, hey man, like, I don't feel that well, you know what I mean? I don't want to fight next week. And then I'm like, what's wrong? You got a cold? And they're like, yeah, man, I got this cold. You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, is this something that you want to do professionally for the rest of your life? And they're like, yeah, I want to be a professional fighter. And I'm like, what you gonna do when there's $5,000 on the line? Well, I'm gonna fight. And I'm like, so you want your first experience fighting sick to be with $5,000 on the line? These are the areas for you to test these things out and to find, like, hey, I competed ill, and this didn't work for me after weigh-ins. I needed to do this, or this worked and made me feel better. You know what I mean? So it's the kind of the area to test those things out. And I believe that, amateurs can be overused, right? Like, there's some promoters that'll go in and they'll use an amateur for 15 to 20 fights, and that's just too much. You know what I mean? I don't think there's a set number, but I do think experience-wise, and when you're watching a guy, you can say, hey, this guy needs 3 fights or this guy needs 10 fights, So I do think there's a healthy balance of how long a guy should fight amateurs until they fight professionally.
Interesting. Thank you for that, man. 559 Fights 100. How happy are you that you got here?
It's crazy. We started 559 Fights 100 as it was originally like a daytime afternoon show that a pay-per-view preceded it, right? So we ran some fights and then we did a pay-per-view watch party after the fight. So it was kind of like prelims. And then everyone stayed and watched the pay-per-view together, and it was a good time. And eventually we stopped doing that, and we just went full-time into building amateur MMA. I'm really excited to do my 100th event, but I wouldn't be doing a 100th event if it wasn't for my team, you know what I mean? And we have a really big group of guys that really are passionate, guys and gals that are really passionate about the sport and passionate about our area. And to me, it's really like this 100th event is kind of like a kudos to them, you know what I mean? And it's like, this is kind of I'm trying to do this is a party for them in essence, because they've worked so hard. So I'm super, super excited about this event.
Talk to me a little bit about it, man. Title fights on it. It's a big event. What are some fights that people should be looking for?
You know, our main event's really awesome. We got a kid, Isaiah Munoz, who's out of a little small town in the valley, and it's really an interesting, unique situation that, you know, that's where we're able to build a lot of these athletes. They're not coming from the bigger cities. They're coming from little farm towns and stuff like that. So you really see large crowds that rally around these kids, almost like you see like the football games, right? Where it's like half the city is shutting down to go watch these guys. So Isaiah Munoz, and then we got a kid named Gabriel Reyes out of Hanford. They're in the main event. They're two younger kids, you know, smaller records, fighting for a bantamweight title. And then we have two really good, experienced young flyweights. I would say, like, because of my situation at Tachi, where I really was involved with flyweights, like that's my favorite division for the amateurs as well. So I would like to say that our promotion has had the best flyweights out of any other amateur promotion in the country for a long time. And this is another case of we have a Javier Torres, who's our champion, but he's also a state champion, and he's taking on an interim champion that we have in Robert Lopez. So that's another big title fight. So those two fights are really going to be high quality fights, but they're also fights with kids that are coming from, you know, small towns in the Central California area, and they bring big fan bases, and it's a very unique to our area, I would say.
Is there another low key fight somewhere on the card that
there's a kid named Francisco Hurtado who's out of Kalinga, California. He is a correctional officer, and also a fighter. He is a huge ticket seller, but more importantly, he's just a really good guy. And I've grown to know his family pretty well, and his circle of friends, and coaches. And I just really love what the kid is about. You know what I mean? I think, you know, just his, you know, working 10, 12-hour shifts, and then finding time to go to the gym and train to do something that he loves and cares about. And then, you know, also being able to manage selling as many tickets as he does, and he signs all his bout agreements on time. He's one of those kids that you put on a dartboard, and if you could say like, hey, be like this kid, he would be one of the like main faces that I would put up there. He's just, you know, great smile, lovable kid, and super awesome. So, you know, he's a guy that I'm looking forward to seeing. There's another kid, Abraham Del Toro, who he lost his last fight in kind of a crazy I think it was like a 2 or 3 second knockout. It was really wild. But he's a kid that I really enjoy working with, and I think he's going to go a long way in the sport too.
Long term, obviously you already have shows booked after 100. But
right.
What's the goal for 559 Fights?
So early on, we were just putting on shows. There came a time where I separated with some partners on the thing, not out of any bad reasons, but they went on to do different things. And when I was more fully invested into 559 Fights and Iridium at the same time, my goal shifted to this show needs to be about teaching these fighters how to grow into being better professionals. So that has been, for over 50 events now, has been like my sole mission, is to teach these guys what it takes to go on and be better professionals. Now I've aligned myself with several professional promotions that have come into the area over the years, and trying to give those guys opportunities to fight. I've got a really good partner at A1 Combat right now with Tom Anderson, and we are doing some really special things over these next, I would say, 18 months where there's going to be more seamless transition from fighting at 559 Fights to fighting at the professional level. So just being able to provide further opportunities for guys to compete on and help to develop that area of fights, with Taji Palace having A1 Combat and doing shows, and then our partnership with A1 Combat, just being able to really grow the sport in the Valley on a consistent level.
Obviously, another promotion that really goes with amateurs pretty heavy is Fury FC, right?
Right.
Is there any chance we can get a 559 Fights versus Fury FC? Like you bring your amateurs, and bring their amateurs and fight.
You know, a lot of people talk cross promotions and doing stuff like that. You know what I mean? I wouldn't mind sending guys out to Texas, and I would foot the bill and pay some guys to go out there and compete. But doing that cross promotion stuff is so hard, man. But I wouldn't mind sending guys out there, some champs and stuff like that, just for them to get some exposure and stuff like that. You know, I really try to invest back into the athlete. You know, on our shows, guys don't have to purchase gloves and shin guards. We'll have gloves and shin guards for them. If guys are really struggling with medicals, our show will sponsor the medicals for them. You know what I mean? We provide hotels for a lot of our athletes and different things. So really, I try to make them not come out of pocket as much as possible. You know what I mean? I've had guys that have entered into state tournaments, and I've sponsored them, help pay for their travel, help pay for their hotel rooms, whatever a case may be. I've helped guys that have went on and become professional, that weren't under my management company, but just a guy that, like, hey, this guy did everything the right way. Like, I want to help him, you know, pay for some of his professional medicals or whatever the case may be. So just being able to help guys and help athletes. So if that meant, like, hey, you know, Fury has some openings and I want to see some good California kids, I would love to send some guys out that way too.
Awesome. How can people watch 559 Fights 100?
So we have a very unique partnership with a local TV station. It's called My53 TV. They have an app, I believe it's called Local B TV. And so our events are live and free for all to watch on that platform. So our guys are able to be on a free TV situation that's also streamed on this app called Local B TV. So that's the way to kind of watch it and check it out. And I don't know any other promotions in the country that are doing free TV for guys. Usually a lot of things are on a pay-per-view model or some type of streaming service that takes a payment. And I just think, like, hey man, like, let these guys get that exposure and be able to sell their shorts and whatever sponsorships, so they can make whatever extra money that they can in a free form. And having it in a free form means more eyeballs, right? So that's why we did it the way that we did it.
Awesome. And then finally, before we wrap up, obviously you're into wrestling. You have that's one of your big things. We've been seeing this influx of national championship wrestlers coming to MMA. Why do you think so many wrestlers are coming over here?
I think now that the sport is growing to a place where guys can start making real money eventually, it kind of piques their interest, because what you had before in the wrestling world was like, hey, post-college, there's a handful of guys that are going to be able to be involved in getting onto the Olympic ladder, right? And it takes so much work and so many huge tournaments that these guys got to go to. So what you did was a lot of those guys just started using their college education and going into different businesses, and which is great, but it didn't kind of turn down that fire inside of them because they were competitors for so long. So now I think what you're seeing is guys that normally would have went on, and maybe they're not Olympic caliber guys, or they don't have that dream to compete at the Olympic level. Those guys would have went on into regular business settings. I think you're seeing those guys now say, hey, I can transition to MMA because I can make because the money is starting to come along. I can make that money where I can have a life now. And so they can kind of have the money and have that fire inside of them at the same time. So it's really awesome. And then, you know, the whole NIL situation has opened the door for not just managers and coaches to be able to get in front of these athletes and say, hey, during your off time, let's get you into the gym and let's get you training over here, and you know, we can cover the cost of these flights or whatever the case may be, get you doing camps and all these other things. You know, it's really been able to help the athletes kind of touch and see smell and feel what MMA is like before they make that decision. So we've been able to help a lot of athletes. We did wrestling camps all over the country this year, coupled with MMA gyms, where the athletes were able to go make some money doing an MMA camp or doing a wrestling camp, and then in that off time they were able to go train with high-level gyms and get the taste of what it was going to be like if that's the direction that they wanted to go in. So it was a really cool, unique situation that we were able to provide for athletes this year.
Yeah, that's fucking awesome. Who are some wrestlers that you're keeping your eye on?
There's a lot of kids out there that are kind of under the radar kids that nobody probably, I mean, they may know them, but you know what I mean? Like Kyle Parko, like is at Arizona State, is someone that, like, I think this kid is going to be something super special. If you ask anyone else on my team, they're going to say Jace Luchau, my son, you know what I mean? But it's because they've all grown up with him, and you know what I mean? They feel like he's going to be someone that transitions into MMA well. I don't want him to fight personally, but if that's what he chooses to do, then I'll support it 100%. But there's, you know, Kyle Parko, there's a kid named Anthony Montalvo, there's a handful of kids that we work with that I know are going to go on and do MMA that I think are going to be super special.
Awesome. And
some of them I gotta kind of keep to myself.
Yeah, of course. And then finally, when just on Iridium, you guys are doing big things. Just talk about, you know, the growth that's going on right now. Obviously, you guys lost Korean Zombie this past weekend. He's a fucking legend. But just talk about Iridium and just the growth.
You know, I think the way and the reason why we've been able to grow the way we have is because, and it's not. It sounds weird and corny, but like the vision that Jason had for the agency was so different than what other people were doing at the time when he developed the agency. And when I came aboard with him 3 years later, to be just a developmental agency and to work with guys at a younger level than everybody else was, and to really invest in regional MMA and like building guys and pushing them along the way, I think that has got us to the point where we develop so much talent, and we're developing so much talent. We're really able to push massive amounts of numbers of guys into the UFC. Whereas the old way of doing things was like, hey, there's this really good kid, let's keep an eye on him. You know what I mean? And if he happens to get to 7-0, 8-0, 9-0, 10-0, like we'll put him into the UFC. You know what I mean? We're like grabbing those guys when they're amateurs now, and we're making sure that they start learning the ropes at an early age, and we get them with guys like Jacob Pargo who are able to like develop their marketing. We get them with Ed Cap, who's helping them with their media and learning how to do interviews and stuff like that. So the growth is kind of infinite when you do stuff like that at that level, right? Where you're taking guys at such a young age and helping develop and grow the product. You know what I mean? So I really think kind of like the sky's the limit for us, right? There's going to be a time where we're at 125, 130, 140 athletes in the UFC because we're going to grow at the clip that the UFC grows at. And if they continue to grow and do events at the level that they're doing at, they're just going to have a need for more and more athletes, right? And I think that we're doing the things the right way to produce those athletes.
Gotcha. And finally, I'll give you the last word. Anything you want to plug? You want to plug your fight? You want to plug anything? It's all you.
Yeah, no. I really would just like to say thank you to my team at 559 Fights. You know what I mean? I've grown a really, really cool team there, and it's great that I don't have to be at home with them and to watch them grow over the years and be able to put on these great events. And it's the same can be said for the Iridium team. You know what I mean? We've grown a very good team here. I just like to thank all those people first and foremost for giving me the juice in the morning to get up and really be able to like push through and drive through and continue to do this. You know what I mean? So first and foremost, just thank those guys. You know.